Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran New York City Jazz clarinetist Joe Traina. We caught up with him on Inauguration Day 2021 to talk about his latest CD, Tip of the Hat, COVID-19, and his life in music. He has kept jazz bands of various sizes together and worked extensively in the New York, New Jersey metro area. He's been there and doing that since 1990. His groups have appeared in so many different venues. He talks about this and so much more.
Happy to do it. I'm just watching the inauguration like millions of other people.
Yeah. Thanks for taking a minute out today.
Please, thanks for having me.
You bet. So you have a brand new album out, and obviously it goes without saying we're in a very extraordinary time with the pandemic and everything else that's going on. Any thoughts on the timing of this? Is it something that you've looked forward to because of everything that's going on?
Well, in a way, Joe, it's a minor miracle that it happened at all. I had plans to go into the studio in early January of last year, and I was somewhat in a hurry to do it. I got almost all of my band in the same room. I had to make a substitution, which was a happy one because the gentleman that I hired was also a coach to me prior to, so that really helped me a lot. And we did it in a single day, but the mixing and mastering didn't really happen until June. We had hoped to go in several weeks later, and it was going to be done in Teaneck, the recording having been done in Mount Vernon. And that was the very day where it was announced, don't come to Teaneck, this is the epicenter of the COVID virus. So it put it off until sometime in June. I used that time, I think, well. We did, I think, a nice job. We were very thorough. We worked hard. And so with all the other work, as you well know, that goes into making a recording, I wasn't really able to have it in my hands until Election Day. I'm delighted that I was able to get it done at all.
Yeah, that's great timing. So what do you ultimately want the listener to get from this experience? It's a happy sound. It's a great album. What do you want them to get from this?
It's an accessible record, as most of my past efforts have been. I always have an eye toward entertaining. I'm from the theater. I managed Broadway theaters for many years. I worked on the other side of shows for brief times, helping to manage them. I had a little bit of producing that I was able to do over that period of time. And a lot of my, and especially very important, engagement came out of my work in the theater and my contacts in the theater. I performed in Stardust Restaurant, which is a theater district tradition, landmark for many decades. And so that gave me a lot of notoriety in a way and certainly a lot of attention. But back to your question, I hope to, with my producer and arranger, Pete McGinnis, bring these well-known standards to a listening audience in a way that's unique. We've always strived, and Pete and I do work together, though he is the arranger, and he will take my ideas and certainly develop them, and usually exceeding my expectations. But one might wonder why a band would want to record Stardust again. Well, though it's very traditional in its presentation, it also has its little surprises. And similarly, for some of the other tunes that we recorded, like Swonderful and Take the A Train, it's really been what I've trafficked in most of my professional life, both in theater but also as a musician.
How did all this begin for you? How did jazz become your life? How did this path begin for you?
Well, as a very young man, I gravitated toward the music of the big bands. I can't say that it was really very prominent in our household, though music was a soundtrack behind much of what we did. My parents had tastes that lent themselves toward the Italian popular singers and some of the popular music of that day. And I liked the music of initially people like Benny Goodman and Glenn Miller. And then when I got to high school age, I wanted to take up an instrument, and I thought the clarinet, which is my primary instrument — I did play the saxophone for a number of decades, but no longer do — was very attractive to me. And so I began to explore that period in American music, and I found that it spoke to me, and the clarinet I found was a good musical voice for me. So I began to explore that music and began to play it and develop, hopefully, an approach, a concept over the years. And then as I was involved in various high school bands, I also was a member of a community band and went to college and continued to play this kind of music. In 1990, my father passed away and I was temporarily out of work. So staying on Staten Island, where I grew up, for a bit of a time, I became reacquainted with some local musicians. And I said, I'd like to put together a group, which I did. And we played locally in a number of places in Staten Island and then in Manhattan. And I've been able to keep various bands together ever since. So with Pete, with initially a great friend and someone who was very instrumental in my genesis of keeping these kinds of bands together, bassist Chuck Bergeron, I became acquainted with and friends with a lot of the musicians that I still am able and lucky enough to perform with today. So it's been a great experience for me, a real learning experience.
What was the first live jazz show you ever saw that really blew your doors down?
I saw over the years, and I can't really recall which was the first, but I did see early on in Staten Island, certainly my great late friend, also a mentor of mine, Don Joseph, who was not well-known trumpet player, but did play with a lot of great musicians in the 50s, 60s, and he became the assistant band director where I went to high school, and so we became friends, and he taught me so much, and we became friends and remained friends after I graduated and after he left that job until the end of his life. But I saw him certainly perform early on, and he took me to various places that I was able to hear other musicians, both local to Staten Island and elsewhere. I heard one of my other teachers, who was a very fine jazz saxophone player, Cesar DeMoro, who was also a teacher early on of the great alto saxophonist John Gordon. Mike Moriali went to my high school a few years ahead of me. I certainly have heard him many times live, great trumpet player and composer. I heard Jimmy Nepper early on. I heard a little later on, I was able to hear people who are no longer with us. So I was very fortunate to hear people like Buddy DeFranco, certainly Hank Jones. Years ago, I would hear Tommy Flanagan when he had his trio at Sweet Basil with George Mraz. So, yeah, I mean, I've been lucky enough, even heard Shearing years and years ago. And they've also, of course, been influences on me along the way.
What do you like the best about being a musician?
I find that it's a healthy outlet. Someone like me who has a lot of nervous energy, who's inquisitive, who wants to be engaged most of the time. I find not having something that's challenging, not having something where I can learn and develop can be the road to mischief for someone like me. The clarinet, I kid about it. I say it's a hauntingly beautiful instrument. Of course, not the way I play it, but it is capable of being played in a way that shows off its diversity. I mean, it's a classical instrument, but I've always stayed with it. It's always been challenging. It's in some ways more challenging now. I'm in my mid to late 50s, but I don't know. It spoke to me. There were times when I heard even recorded music, and I thought, what is that? It really knocked me out. And I would say the first time I heard an Artie Shaw, the first time I heard Charlie Parker or Art Tatum, and I said, music really speaks to me, and I think what I'd like to do is put that out in the world as much. I like to say I want to bring beauty into the world, and again, I took up the clarinet, so that's even a bigger challenge. But it's meaningful because It also, there's a certain truthfulness to it, and there's a certain community in playing with others, and I really have always sought that, to be part of something, to belong to something. So, the long answer is those are a number of reasons why it appeals to me.
So when we do return, once COVID slows down and we are able to get back out and play and be in the crowd, what do you hope we all realize about this absence of live music?
I'm hopeful there'll be a real resurgence, and not only that, I would like to believe that there'll be a greater appreciation for live performance of all kinds. I think that, and I've had this conversation a number of times with a number of colleagues, I think that this country in many ways has failed us in so much as it does not support the arts, either in the culture and certainly the government with subsidizing certain, really all art forms, be it theater or fine art or music. And I have always thought that all of the great societies and civilizations going way, way back to the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, they all had the arts at the center of that civilization. And I feel that we suffer from a lack of focus and a lack of elevating the arts in this country. I mean, jazz musicians, as you well know, they go to Europe, they go to Japan, and they're celebrated as well. I think they should be. There's an incredible amount of education and passion and work and study that goes into being any kind of professional artist. And I'm hopeful that there will be more opportunities, that there will be an acknowledgement that this was missing during the past year and probably in some coming months until there is more security about having live and public performances. And maybe the culture will be better because of that. Maybe there will be the acknowledgement and there's a sense of that this is not really a hobby for all these people. It's not something that should be taken for granted. It's not something that in clubs and restaurants should be thought of as less valuable than the wait staff. So, I have a podcast that I started in October. It's called Please Join Me. And the primary goal is to really introduce and remind the public, remind them of these artists, be it jazz musicians or actors or writers that are not able to perform, that are not able to work as professionals, to be salaried employees, and what are they doing during these challenging times? Some of them have been able to be very creative, and they use the internet to perform, they write, they are working on their crafts. So I think that the best thing that people can do in the arts is to simply make art and to continue to find ways to remain active and to prepare for those days when they'll be able to get out into the world again and do what they do best.
So everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, and your colleagues, but you're the one that's living your life. Who do you think you are?
Well, I actually posed that recently. I said, are you who you think you are? And I said, not to say that you might think you're Napoleon and you're not really Napoleon, but if you essentially think that you are a musician or think that you are a father or a husband, it's a fact, but, how do you feel about yourself in the continuum of life and in the categories, if you will, which I don't like especially, but of being a husband, a father, a musician. I like to think I'm someone in my humble way, and I really always defer, to the musicians I've been lucky enough to surround myself with. I have learned so much. They have been very loyal to me, and I've tried to be very loyal to them. But essentially, I like to think that I'm something of the keeper of a flame, that I want to keep this music alive, that I want to continue to play it as best I can, that I want to continue to present it to the public in an interesting way, a surprising way. And that's so much where Pete comes in, because folks will say, well, I know that song, and what are you going to do that makes me sit up and listen, or that's different from what I've heard before. And so there's an aspect of that too. But, I like to promote as well. I like to present, and I think I do that fairly well. I try to focus the attention on the musicians, focus the attention on the music, focus the attention on what's come before, and hopefully how that informs what is happening now and will happen in the future. There's a history which I think certainly needs to be not only acknowledged, but really should be learned, that gives us an idea of where this kind of music started and how it developed and where it is today. I mean, for about 10 years there, jazz and big band music was the music of America from the mid-30s to mid-40s, and that really hasn't happened since. I certainly don't think it happened before. So, it struggles to continue to find an audience in its way. It's certainly not nearly as popular as it once was, but, I'm doing my little bit, and I think that I have the time and the energy, certainly, and, I hope that's something of who I am, and I'm hoping that I'm successful in demonstrating that.
Beautiful. Joe, thank you for talking to me on a pretty special day in the world, in the annals of our history, about the new music and about your life and music. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. I was very happy to be with you, and you take care now.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview. We give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Joe for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Davino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.